And as a reminder for anybody who didn't receive the email directly, we'll also be sharing out any slides and a recording of the session to all registrants of the webinar for people who weren't able to join us in person. And with that, I'd want to welcome you all to our NASEO Buildings Committee meeting on state-owned buildings as test beds. This is also the third installation of our Public Buildings Collaborative, which has been a discussion series spanning the past several weeks and going into the next few months to provide a forum for state energy offices to discuss programs for energy efficiency and electrification of mush market or municipal, university, school and hospital buildings and community serving buildings. We've had some great sessions so far in the beginning of March, where we heard from some states on their legacy and longstanding programs, as well as newer programs to work with local governments and small or medium-sized building owners to funnel resources towards energy efficiency and electrification, as well as a second session on ESPC, or energy savings performance contracting, best practices, pitfalls, from the standpoint of an owner's representative, and how states might also incorporate owners reps into their energy saving performance contracting programs. Today, I'm super excited to invite some panelists to speak on their state energy office led lead by example efforts. And this all kind of ties into the goal of having states kind of share best practices on day-to-day program implementation, stakeholder engagement, accessing funding and financing solutions, as well as leverage NASEO's network of members to bounce ideas off of. So very excited to have you all here today. And just a few framing questions that everybody in this audience is welcome to consider to kind of think from your own perspectives, some of the topics that we'll be talking through today. We're kind of interested in understanding whether your office engages with the agencies that oversee the energy performance of state-owned buildings, as well as how your office thinks specifically about assisting and offering resources to state-owned buildings, since they have unique and different payback requirements, procurement challenges, financing considerations, and admin hurdles, as well as how your office defines lead by example, and how they might measure impact and replicability of efforts across different building sectors using state-owned buildings as kind of a test bed, as the title of this webinar suggests, and an area for demonstration. All right, so without further ado, I'll just pass things over now to Julie Staveland, who will facilitate the rest of this webinar and provide a few remarks to start. Julie, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jasmine. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Jasmine said, my name is Julie Staveland, and I'm the Assistant Division Director for the Materials Management Division at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE. I also serve as Michigan State Energy Office Director. So to kind of kick us off and kind of ground our conversation today, I just wanted to share a little bit about how we're approaching this work in Michigan, where public buildings, we really see these as the center of our broader kind of climate and energy strategy. So in Michigan, this work is anchored in the My Healthy Climate Plan, which Governor Whitmer announced in 2020, and it's our roadmap to protect the state's environment, promote clean energy, and put Michigan on a path toward economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2050. This plan, it wasn't just about setting the targets, it was also kind of setting the stage to have the state lead by example. So as part of this, in 2020, Governor Whitmer also issued Executive Directive 2020-10, which charged our Department of Technology Management and Budget, DTMB, with lowering energy intensity in state buildings by 2040. And we're just 5 years later, and we have smashed that goal out of the park. we've achieved over a 59% reduction in energy consumption across our state buildings, which has resulted in over 53 million in taxpayer savings. And what's important was how this was accomplished, right? It wasn't just a single project or technology, it was a coordinated kind of portfolio-wide strategy. This included LED conversions across approximately 85, which covered approximately 85% of our fixtures across all of our facilities, advanced lighting controls, smart metering, comprehensive energy audits, and then centralized building controls. Right. And so just some specific examples of this work. We had some deep retrofits that were done in some of our more historic buildings that included major HVAC updates, smart controls, and of course, LED upgrades. And that resulted in 4.3 million in annual utility savings just in those two facilities. In another building, we were able to cut energy use by 70% through smart lighting retrofits. Essentially, they were able to eliminate 75% of the fixtures in the building through just efficiency redesign, and that's saving us roughly 77,000 a year in that facility. We're also using energy performance contracting as, one of our key tools to really scale this work, right? Which allows the upgrades to be financed through the energy savings that they generate. And it really creates a sustainable model for us to have continuous reinvestment and expansion. We're seeing strong results in terms of benchmarking and performance. We had 10 buildings in 2025 that achieved the Energy Star High Performer status, which demonstrates, of course, that these facilities are operating more efficiently than comparable buildings nationwide. So these buildings are really functioning as test beds, right? Allowing us to pilot new technologies, validate savings, and work through implementation challenges in real world conditions. And it's not just our buildings. At the same time, right, we're taking that kind of whole government approach to lead by example. So we're aligning state facilities, vehicle fleets, procurement practices, and then infrastructure planning under that unified strategy to reduce emissions and improve efficiency. But we also don't just stop at the state government level of leading by example. We also have a program that's designed to help local governments lead by example in their own communities, which is one of our core programs at the Energy Office. It's our Community Energy Management Program, which we funded through our annual state energy program funds, as well as the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant and our state energy program supplemental funding that was provided through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We provide grants and technical support to local governments to implement energy efficiency and clean energy projects in their own public buildings. So we meet the local governments where they are, providing them incentives to take action on those energy projects, whether it's just getting started with the energy planning, benchmarking, audits, or completing those energy efficiency upgrades and transitioning to renewables. So that our communities can also replicate and scale the same types of successes we're seeing at the state level. So taken together, this really highlights the value of public buildings and leading by example, not just at the state level, but across all levels of government in Michigan. And that's exactly what we're here to discuss today. So, how states can use their building portfolios to drive wider impact for their residents. So with me today, we have Eric Friedman, Leading by Example Director with the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, and Amanda Welch, Energy Analyst with the Oregon Department of Energy. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eric to get us started.
All right, great. Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it. And thanks, Jasmine, for inviting me today. It's really great to be here. I think there's some familiar names here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's hope that this works. Bear with me for 1 second. Let's see. All right, somebody let me know if that's working. I see lots of...
Yes. Yeah.
That good? Okay, great. All right, so as Julie said, my name is Eric Friedman. I am the director of the Leading by Example division at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, or DOERS, as we like to call ourselves. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about who is Leading by Example in Massachusetts, and what do we do, and how do we actually, with a small team, how do we facilitate and support some of the broader statewide emissions and clean energy goals and targets that have been established, both for the state, but also for state government, our state government portfolio. I'll talk a little bit about the progress that we've made in meeting some of those emissions targets and how we are trying to think comprehensively and holistically about the future, and just a couple of quick takeaways as to why we think our program is effective and how we try and be as effective as possible. And then I will close by just mentioning a growing number of ways in which Leading by Example programs have been collaborating across the country. It's interesting, just in the last couple of years, a lot of these efforts have really started blossoming, and wanted to just kind of let folks know of the different opportunities and different ways in which LBE programs are talking to each other. All right. So what is the Leading by Example program? And hang on one second, I'm just going to move, see if I can move that. All right. All right. I'm just helping my screen out here. So Jasmine, let me know. I can't see my screen. So if there's any questions or any issues that come up, please let me know.
Okay.
So this is really just the official definition of our Leading by Example division. We have been around for a number of years, and our job is really to work across state government, which includes our authorities and our 29 public colleges and universities, to support and advance a whole host of clean energy and sustainable practices that ultimately are helping to reduce the environmental impacts of our state government operations, and that are essentially in support of our broader statewide goals across multiple sectors. So what does Leading by Example look like, and who's included? This varies from state to state, and many states have Leading by Example programs. They're not always called Leading by Example. Many states include their colleges and universities, which we do. Some states do not. We also include some of our authorities and kind of bring them into our program. But essentially in Massachusetts anyway, we have about 80 million square feet of buildings, 11,000 vehicles, give or take, that are part of our state portfolio. And obviously the impacts from all of these facilities operating, in some cases 24/7, are significant. You can just see here about 1 billion kilowatt hours a year of electricity consumption, and almost 800,000 metric tons of CO2 that we track for our state portfolio. So how do we see our Leading by Example program? We like to think of ourselves as kind of a hub here. In many states, and in Massachusetts certainly, and in other states, there are lots of environmental programs and sustainability programs that are happening across different agencies. And what we like to do is sort of try and bring them all under one umbrella, so that we are all sort of rowing in the same ship. So that our purchasing office that works on environmental issues related to goods and services, along with our construction office that is doing a slew of energy efficiency projects and new construction, our fleet management office, all of these entities we like to sort of bring into this universe, and we are all considered Leading by Example. We are not responsible for implementing or overseeing many of the projects that are out there, but we are working across all of state government to try and make sure that we're all moving in the same direction, meeting the same goals and targets, and following and adhering to the same policies and guidelines. We also do work across, as I said before, we work sort of across the country, working with a number of different groups, which I'll talk about at the end of this program. Obviously, there's a context for this. Massachusetts has some very aggressive goals and targets, and lots of planning that goes on almost continuously, it feels like, to try and meet long-range emissions and clean energy targets and goals. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's been a lot of work over the last decade or more in figuring out how we're going to meet some of our long-range goals, which call for net zero emissions by 2050, and then also establishes a number of what we call sector sublimits for emissions reductions across sectors like buildings, transportation, and electricity. And there are a number of interim goals for many of those subsectors. As part of that effort, and I'll talk in more detail in a second, we have an executive order for state government that applies only to state government, that is essentially trying to push our state government forward so that we are truly leading by example and demonstrating how we can meet or even exceed these targets. And so that order, which you can see here, has a number of different provisions in it. The first chart here on the top looks at a number of different areas and has specific targets and goals. I'm not going to go through them all. I will really just focus on the top one, which is really the driving force, which is an emissions target for on-site fossil fuel use, or otherwise known by some of us as Scope 1 emissions. That is the driving force behind many of our programs, which I'll talk about in a second. And then there are a number of other goals here related to the fleet and specific types of fuel use. We also have a number of requirements in this executive order, ranging from requirements around new acquisitions of electric vehicles for the fleet, some very stringent requirements for new construction related to fossil fuel free heating, and adopting our specialized opt-in stretch code, which focuses a lot on envelope improvements. And then there are a number of sort of, I guess what I would say, tier 2 program descriptions in here, and targets relating to existing buildings, and trying to make sure that the state is also paying attention to other sustainability issues, some of which we have control over, and some of which we just are encouraging agencies to participate in. I want to just stop for a second and go back to that comment I made about the first goal in the executive order, and the fact that that is kind of the driving force behind many of the programs, and kind of a shift in the way we are looking at emissions. And this is somewhat different than how a lot of states, I think, are looking at emissions. And I just want to stop for a second and talk about it, because it is really the reason in which our programs have shifted and changed, and is really driving how we focus and what we focus on as a program and as a state. So when we developed this last executive order that was issued in 2021, about a year or two previous to that, we were really doing a deep dive into our emissions progress prior to 2020. And what we discovered is that because of a whole variety of state policies, but also changing market conditions, that the grid in Massachusetts, the New England grid, had actually been getting much cleaner over time. And you can see here the dotted line here is showing the trajectory of emissions, the emissions intensity of our grid. You can see there in the green line, the solid green line, that is the actual emissions reductions in Scope 2 emissions for our state portfolio. Won't come as much of a surprise, or perhaps it not that hard to see that those lines are pretty much in sync. And so what that meant was that many of our emissions reductions we were seeing in Scope 2 emissions and in the electricity sector were in fact happening because the grid was getting cleaner. That's not to say we weren't doing efficiency and putting in LEDs and lighting controls and all sorts of efficiency measures around electricity. But from an emissions perspective, what we were seeing is that many of those gains were coming because the grid itself was getting cleaner. And from a policy perspective, it is going to get even cleaner moving into the future. At the same time, what we found is that the reduction in Scope 1 emissions, while declining, was declining at a much slower rate. And so that really prompted us to rethink how we look at emissions, and really kind of led us to the executive order requirement that is focusing on Scope 1 emissions, on-site emissions. We are not ignoring emissions or ignoring efficiencies when it comes to electricity, but because we know the grid is getting cleaner every year, at least we hope so, that is our plan. We really wanted to focus on the place where we really need to take steps. We need to take action to reduce emissions within our state portfolio. So how does our program get involved? I'm not going to read all these things, but there are a number of different areas. We have a relatively small staff, which I'll show in a second. I will say a couple of my staff on our program here have joined our call here today, Sophia and Ariana. So if there are questions that they can answer, hopefully they can jump on. But we do a lot of cross-government coordination. So we are constantly talking to LBE coordinators that are appointed by each agency. That's a requirement of the executive order. We have regular council meetings. We meet often with individual agencies that either have questions for us or have large emissions portfolios. So we want to make sure they're on track. We provide a series of technical assistance, how to implement certain provisions of the executive order, all the way down to developing policies on specific topics that, like a renewable diesel policy that we're developing, or a new policy on how to support EV charging for domicile vehicles. We try and act as kind of a funding hub where we are making sure that agencies are aware of all the funding opportunities, and when we get funding made available to us, we try and design those programs to fill in some funding gaps that are not being addressed by existing funding programs. And we spend a lot of time gathering data, tracking data, and analyzing that data, and creating forecasts for where are we in terms of our progress, and also where are we headed in terms of meeting some of the goals in the executive order. As I said, we have a small staff. There's 5 of us, but each of those things I just talked about, those categories, you can sort of draw a dotted line between Sophia and the data, between Morgan and some of our building and Scope 1 emissions work, between Ariana and much of the outreach and coordination we do, and Nicole, who oversees much of our transportation work. I'm going to just run through these slides really quickly because I think it is important. The data that we track is important to make sure we can take stock of our progress, but it also really helps us to tell the story about where we've been, where we're headed, and really helps to illustrate the success, hopefully, of many of the programs that we're working on. So just very quickly, this is obviously looking at our on-site fossil fuel reduction progress. We've actually met our fiscal year 25 target in fiscal year 24, and but have a number of steps to take to get to 35% reduction and then 60% reduction in the next 5 and 15 years. This is another way we like to tell a story where 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we were evenly split between fuel oil and natural gas in terms of emissions. We had lots of coal still in our portfolio, and that has obviously shifted. And today we are primarily driven, our emissions anyway, are primarily driven by natural gas consumption, with vehicle fuels now taking up the second largest portion of our emissions in the state portfolio for state government. So I keep pushing the wrong button here. Another way we use the data is really to help us target and prioritize which agencies we're going to work with. So if we're focusing on Scope 1 emissions, looking at building use, obviously natural gas and fuel oil are 2 of the biggest fuel sources that are contributing to those emissions. And we can see here where some of the top users are. And in our portfolio, natural gas, which again accounts for more than 3/4 of our Scope 1 emissions, the top 5 users account for more than 2/3 of our emissions. So that obviously helps us to really prioritize programs. If we zeroed out natural gas at every single facility except our top 2, we would still not meet our goal. So we clearly have to focus on some of those larger users. And this really helps us to identify, which agencies are the laggards, which agencies are doing really well in terms of reducing emissions, both in Scope 1 and Scope 2. This, again, helps us to really target and prioritize the programs that we are developing and some of the forecasting and planning that we are undertaking. And then lastly, just a fleet electrification progress showing us just surpassing our goal in fiscal year 2025. And kind of over here in terms of planning, recognizing that, we need to ramp up. If we have just over 460 zero-emission vehicles on our fleet, we now have to purchase about half of those every year for the next 5 years to meet our goals. And sort of lastly, in this section, I just wanted to mention that we are really focusing on decarbonization. This is again being driven by the Scope 1 emissions target in our executive order. So what this really means is that we are trying to shift away entirely from fossil fuels, which, as many folks know, is very challenging at some of our larger sites. So a program that we recently, we're actually underway now, is a grant program that our division is running, providing kind of pilot money or seed money for sort of initial phases of large scale decarbonization efforts across multiple campuses that are really looking at a series of different types of technologies that I've listed here, trying to address different campus needs and different ways of getting at electrification and moving away from fossil fuels. And lastly, really here, before I talk about the other programs across the country, this is really, I've said a lot of this already, but these are the ways in which we think our program really helps to bring all of the different silos and all of the different programs across state government together. Again, we are sort of acting as this kind of coordinating center. We bring people together in lots of different ways and make sure that we're all moving toward the same goals and same targets. We do try and really engage our stakeholders, our state partners in a variety of ways, whether that's an annual awards program or, again, our council meetings or one-on-one meetings. So really trying to find different ways to effectively talk to and communicate with our stakeholders. We want folks to know that we are the ones setting sort of policy and targets. We don't want agencies going off and saying, well, I'm going to use this fuel and I'm going to use that fuel and I'm going to count it this way. We want to make sure that state government is operating as a unit. And so we take responsibility for setting those overall targets and also developing the policies that govern those targets and how we account for our emissions. And really, again, just lastly, sort of acting as kind of a, this hub or one-stop shop for a whole variety of assistance opportunities for agencies to make sure that they are taking advantage of everything that is out there to support them in the work that they are doing to actually implement these projects that need to happen to get to our goals. And now, truly, lastly, there's just 2 slides here. These are there are 4 entities, 4 other groups that are actually happening that meet regularly to talk similarly about some of the same issues that this group is talking about, and that many of us talk about with other states on a one-on-one basis. But the first one is the Department of Energy, Better Buildings, Better Plants. They have a bi-monthly convening of states focusing on state government building issues. It's open to any state that's part of the Better Buildings Challenge or are a Better Buildings Challenge goal achiever, or through what's called the BBC, if you're part of the BBC initiative. There's also a nonprofit electrification coalition that runs a state fleet cohort that, again, meets every other month to talk about issues specifically related to state fleets and charging issues for state vehicles. And then lastly, there are sort of 2 specific LBE cohorts. I believe Winston is on the call here from Wisconsin, who is spearheading this national LBE cohort that came from a U.S. Climate Alliance project or program that had been running, and Winston's been doing a great job in corralling us, and it's a growing program that is open to any state that has an LBE program that wants to participate. Please get in touch with Winston. And then we have created a Northeast LBE peer group, lots of vowels there, and that group has really we've met in person a number of times and have created a Microsoft Teams group. Actually, as part of the national group, I should mention, we've created a Teams way of communicating, and folks, if you do join this group, can work with Ariana to get set up on that. And our Northeast group really is there in case we want to meet in person, which we have last year and are hoping to meet again in person, just to kind of create a little bit of more connection. And that's it. I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back
Thanks, Eric. That was great.
to
Okay, so now we're going to transition it over to Amanda.
Awesome. All right. Hey, everyone. Those are fantastic presentations, Eric and Julie. It's really inspiring what you guys are doing. We're a bit more homegrown, so hopefully, that comes across well. So can we see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, cool. So like I said, good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Welch, an energy analyst with the Oregon Department of Energy. And so I lead our statewide building efficiency and emissions work, especially strategy, planning, and coordination across our agencies to improve energy performance and emissions reduction. So today I'll share what our state building strategy looks like and how we scale what works across our portfolio. So before jumping in, I wanted to give a quick overview of Odo. That is our nickname for our agency. And for those that haven't worked with us yet, so at the core, Odo is a policy and technical support agency. And our mission is to help Oregonians make informed energy decisions that keep the system safe, equitable, and sustainable. And we carry out that mission through data analysis, technical assistance, energy education, and regulatory oversight, all of which directly supports our state building work. And one important distinction is that we don't own or operate our buildings. I'm just going to pause there. Jasmine, would you mind just muting everybody? I feel like I hear some feedback. Thank you. One important distinction is that we don't own nor operate our buildings. So the Department of Administrative Services, DAS, and I have a few folks on the line with us from the agency, own or lease a large portion of state facilities, and they lead our capital planning. And many other agencies in Oregon own their own buildings as well. So Odo's role is to coordinate, to guide, and to align everyone across the enterprise. So Oregon operates a pretty large and diverse building portfolio, and it is just the state agency buildings. So this is over 300 facilities ranging from offices to prisons, hospitals, labs. We also have some hatcheries in there for anyone going up to Northeast Oregon. You can see some salmon hatcheries, which are really awesome. And so there's some significant variation across the state as well. So buildings different age, system types, and local operating needs, but also in climate. So for facilities west of the Cascades, they operate in a really mild, wet marine climate, while those east of the Cascades face much drier conditions with larger temperature swings. And so that range of climates and building types make our facilities ideal demonstration sites. So what works in one region often needs to be adapted for another. We also have distributed responsibilities across our agencies. So there are smaller energy teams in each agency supporting the entire portfolio. And all of this reinforces why a coordinated statewide framework is so important. So without the consistent tools and the shared practices, each agency is left solving similar problems in isolation. And so this is the ecosystem that we rely on to support agencies and scale improvements statewide. There's a lot here, so I'm going to take it one by one. So the State Energy Efficient Design Program provides baselines, energy use intensity, EUI targets, and a full life cycle planning framework. It's our consistent data foundation across agencies. The Oregon Public Facilities Alliance, or OPFA, is our collaboration engine. So this brings together 70 plus staff from 18 agencies to troubleshoot issues, share success, and coordinate strategies. It's one of our most effective scaling mechanisms, and it's pretty casual by purpose to make sure that people are comfortable sharing things here. We also have our building performance standard, the BPS, and so that was created from legislation in 2023 that establishes long-term performance targets. And so BPS is really our North Star, and this helps align SEED, our planning work, and energy management practices. We have a new dashboard that will be coming online soon, and that's an emissions and energy visualization tool that helps agencies see trends, track their progress, and communicate results. We have an SEM, a strategic energy management program, and so that partners our agencies with an energy coach to set goals, put new practices in place, and earn incentives as you go. So you really have someone to walk through you through all of this. And we recently, last year in November, published the Oregon State Energy Strategy. And this informs and aligns future policy direction and is a key enabler for scaling projects without relying solely on what's happening one by one in our agencies. And lastly, we have our state agency energy savings revolving fund, which is my baby at the moment. And so this is a reinvestment tool that allows agencies to retain and reinvest 100% of net energy savings into future improvements. And so this is really awesome to not just rely on our capital cycles and have a self-generating reinvestment tool. And so together, all of these are our tools that allow us not only to plan and analyze, but actually demonstrate what works in our buildings. And so what does it actually look like in our buildings? So we focus on measures that are practical for agencies to adopt, especially in portfolios with limited budgets or staff capacity. So typically, we'll start with low-cost operational work, like HVAC tuning, verifying schedules, and optimizing controls. And so we focus then on retrofits, so like LED lights, heat pumps, VFDs, and control upgrades that deliver measurable, repeatable savings. Then we head into audits, and that can help identify repairs and replacements that have real impact on energy use. Clear documentation and energy management sustain all of these improvements. And when larger projects come down the pike, we want to align those improvements to the capital cycle and make sure they take into account long-term emissions goals and energy reductions. So once we demonstrate what works in individual buildings, the SEED program is the tool that lets us scale those results across the entire SEED portfolio. And just, if you don't remember from the last slide, SEED is the State Energy Efficient Design Program. And this gives us baselines, energy use intensity targets, and a way to track our progress for every single building in the program. It also helps agencies compare buildings, identify savings opportunities, validate their improvements, and prioritize capital investments based on need. And so you can see from this chart here on the right that our portfolio has a lot of variation. So some buildings are meeting target, others are pretty far off. Right now, we are smack dab in the middle. And SEED lets us really move beyond anecdotes and look at consistent baselines and trend data across the entire portfolio. So that tells us which buildings need that operational tuning versus the deeper retrofits. And so SEED gives facility managers something they've never really had before, so a consistent statewide way to see how their buildings compare to similar buildings across agencies. For example, if the Department of Agriculture has a 50,000 square foot office building and the Department of Transportation has a building of the same type and size, SEED lets managers ask, why is my building performing differently than theirs? What operational or equipment strategies are they using? And so that's where the Oregon Public Facilities Alliance, OPFA, comes in. And so OPFA brings together over 70 facility and energy staff from 18 agencies, creating a space for people who rarely really get to talk to each other, such as those facility managers and the sustainability analysts and the engineers and the planners. So these people that really work in silos, but they all work on the similar projects, they can actually connect. And so it becomes an effective mechanism for spreading strategies quickly across agencies because it gives people a place to troubleshoot, share what's working, what's not, and compare real-world examples. So as SEED tells us the what is happening, OPFA is where we figure out the why and what to do next. And so recently, this has all taken on even greater importance as a place to really demystify new policies like the Building Performance Standard, ensuring that agencies aren't interpreting or implementing in isolation. And so the best part is how quickly these ideas really translate into real projects. And so here are a few examples that I wanted to share. So DAS has been piloting a simple but surprisingly impactful practice for the past couple years, night walks. And so just before staff leave, their facilities teams walk the building as systems begin to shut down. They confirm that the HVAC equipment is actually turning off per schedule. They look for plug loads that remain powered overnight, and they document any lighting that isn't shutting off. And those observations then go straight to the electricians and contractors in the agency who adjust those schedules, they correct the controls, or they update equipment settings. And so this is a great example of a low-cost operational strategy that delivers immediate savings. At the Department of Corrections, we've seen strong results when facility staff pair operational awareness with targeted improvements. So one example is at the Oregon State Penitentiary, where a facility's energy technician conducted a full inventory of the steam traps serving the heating system. He identified 39 traps that were failing or leaking, which meant significant energy waste and increased maintenance risk. And so through Energy Trust of Oregon incentives, ODOC replaced all those traps, which saves over $55,000 a year and more than 53,000 therms annually. And this is a great demonstration project because it shows how operations staff understand their systems best, and they can really identify opportunities better than we can. And it's always amazing working with these people. And so my last example here is from the Department of Forestry, where staff have been navigating a pretty messy building automation system, or BAS migration. So their legacy controls are tied into a new BAS front end, which means the system looks fine on the surface, but underneath things don't always behave the way the interface suggests. So as they've dug in, they've uncovered permission problems, some sensors that report okay, even though they're not functioning, and serious latency in how data moves between the old and the new system. And so instead of trying to solve everything at once, the team has taken a really steady and persistent approach, fixing one issue at a time. And so since last July, they've resolved 7 separate problems. And this is really a common story across the state. Modernizing controls isn't a switch flip. It's really detective work. But each fix improves how the building performs and reduces energy waste. And so that example tees us up very well for the ground reality, because even when staff are doing everything right, the underlying systems can make progress slow and incremental. And so we work really directly with our agencies. We're almost like a grassroots sort of program. And so we hear consistently from our state agencies of aging infrastructure, of limited staff, and reactive maintenance cycles, making it hard for agencies to get ahead. And even when opportunities are clear, it's difficult to align operations and capital planning and funding, especially for those without consistent data or automation systems. And I know that these are really universal public sector pressures, but they really shape the kinds of tools and support that agencies need from us and how we can provide support as an agency that doesn't really have funding to provide. And so what do we do then? So for aging infrastructure and unclear priorities, we help agencies make sense of where to focus first. We provide planning guidance, we help set life cycle targets, and we support the development of clear project scopes so that agencies can invest in limited resources where they matter most. We also work pretty closely with the DAS Capital Planning Board to make sure that there's this holistic ecosystem starting to build. For staffing shortages and reactive maintenance, we step in with hands-on support that includes training and operational walkthroughs and guiding folks towards our SEM coaching so that agencies can stabilize day-to-day operations while also building long-term practices. For limited funding, we help agencies pair projects with incentives and use the state agency energy savings revolving fund so they can reinvest those savings into future improvements, reducing dependence on those capital cycles. So 2 more here. So for fragmented data and inconsistent system records, the statewide facility condition effort is designed to solve just that. So it creates a unified inventory and gives agencies better visibility into equipment and long-term planning. And lastly, for siloed or disconnected planning, OPFA gives agencies a venue to come together. So these are 2 new tools in our toolbox, and I know I briefly mentioned the revolving loan fund. But these tools really take our work to the next level. So first, the facility condition assessment contract will create a statewide view of building systems, something Oregon has never had in a unified way. And that database will help agencies understand equipment condition, replacement needs, and opportunities for upgrades. This is currently in the RFP process, but once in place, it will become the backbone for planning larger demonstration projects across multiple agencies and for leveraging economies of scale and procurement. And some labor as well. So we're trying to really think of if there are more than one agency thinking of the same project, let's say LED lighting, they're usually working in their silos right now. How can we bring that all together and reduce some of those costs? And maybe get those projects to move a little faster as well. And second, we have the State Agency Energy Savings Revolving Loan Fund. I hope that's the last time I have to say that today. It's too long, but this will give agencies a way to reinvest their own savings into new improvements. And so, like I said, it's a self-financing mechanism that helps agencies break out of biennial budget constraints and continuously modernize their buildings. It also gives our agencies a bit more autonomy over their buildings. Like I said, they know what's best. And so I think it puts a little bit more agency into them, pun intended, that will make energy efficiency in our buildings work a little bit faster and better. And so this all adds up to a practical, repeatable approach for managing a diverse portfolio with very limited resources. So demonstration projects let us test and refine strategies in real buildings. Seed and our dashboards give agencies clear, comparable data to understand how they're performing. OPFA creates the space to talk through challenges. And now with the facility condition assessment and the revolving loan fund, agencies will have even better information and a way to reinvest savings into future improvements. And this framework is really not complicated nor heavily resourced, although I really wish it would be. But I think it makes it really approachable for a lot of states who are just starting out or don't have too much funding. And with that, thanks for sitting with me to go over our strategy. None of this is really possible without strong partnerships across our agencies, across our roles, and across states. And our approach is very much built from what we've learned, and we're always refining it. And I hope that includes in collaboration with some of the states here today, and happy to dig into any of these topics further. Julie, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Okay, so I know that there is at least one question in the chat. So for those of you that are on, please feel free to, either raise your hand, come off mute, ask questions of our wonderful panelists or put your questions in the chat. I do have a couple as well, but let's answer Rodney's first. That's in the chat. So the question is, do any of your building programs include demand flexibility and peak reduction?
We're trying for it to include that. So the Oregon State Energy Strategy really heavily talks about demand response opportunities, peak load shaving, and things along those lines. And we're trying to test that out with some of our facilities.
Yeah, and I will say for sure, this is something that is front and center to a lot of the work that we're trying to do. But I think, as Amanda just sort of alluded to, it can be complicated and it's a little challenging. But one of our grant programs includes funding for battery storage to be paired with solar, as an example. We're also working with utilities to try and encourage agencies to participate in off-peak charging programs for electric vehicles. So it is definitely something that we are, trying to integrate and incorporate into our programs.
Awesome. Okay, so this is for either you, or Amanda, or you, Eric, either one. But how does your office help state-owned buildings manage simple payback requirements on capital projects?
You want to start, Eric?
Yeah, so I can try. I will say, that again, I think, and Amanda, you mentioned this, our partnerships with the construction agencies is really critical to a lot of the work that we do. And so they are often developing those large scale energy efficiency projects, which historically and traditionally have focused on paybacks, right? And so that is where, historically, where a lot of the lighting retrofits and sort of, I don't want to say simple, but cost-effective energy efficiency programs and measures were part of large-scale energy efficiency projects. It has gotten a little bit more challenging to incorporate payback as we move toward decarbonization, in part because decarbonization is quite expensive upfront. We're talking about not just replacing systems in kind, but putting in entirely new systems and entirely new infrastructure. And also we are shifting away from what historically have been lower cost fossil fuels to sort of higher cost per BTU electricity. So particularly in the Northeast. So that has definitely become more of a challenge. I think the way we're trying to do that is sort of bundle um, key efficiency measures to go along with decarbonization so that the cost of those decarbonization projects are lower. Every BTU power we don't need, we can reduce the number of wells we're digging, for example, for ground source heat pumps, or can reduce the amount of internal heating we have to put in, particularly for new construction. So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, we care about payback, but it's become a little bit harder and perhaps slightly, I don't want to say less of a priority, but it's kind of integrated. It's not the sole purpose of the energy programs that we are running now. We are really focused on trying to reduce emissions to support what are legislatively mandated emissions reduction targets in Massachusetts.
And if I could just jump in there with a follow-up for our side. Also, I have a couple people on the line for my team, and for the last question, the demand response, I'm hearing that sometimes some of our union contracts actually prohibit our state agency buildings from doing demand response, which is actually a challenge that I wasn't too familiar with, but definitely a challenge. So just a call back there. And so for simple payback, we don't actually have a fixed simple payback requirement for our state capital projects. But we do know that in practice, some measures get engineered out. Energy efficiency practices get engineered out, that is, because of internal budget pressures and short project timelines or a preference for fast paybacks. And so part of our role is to step in when we know that a big project is coming down the line or that something's happening at the planning board, and really make a strong case that these measures are long-term payback, but also the co-benefits of it. You have a better internal quality of life, let's say, whatever the term is for in your building. And so those outside parameters that would make a CBA analysis a little bit better.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Eric, there was one question in the chat for you about how is your division funded, or your team funded? And then it looks like one of your team members responded to the second part of that question that was asking about the awards and grants that you mentioned.
Yeah, we are funded through the Department of Energy Resources. Our department is funded in a variety of ways, and I'm sure every state has different funding sources, so I don't want to get into the weeds, but we're actually not, in general, we're not dependent on the operating budgets of Massachusetts. We get our funding through other types of assessments that happen in Massachusetts. And so our team is funded just in the way that all staff are funded at DOER. Yeah, and Ariana put a link, but we do have an annual awards program coming up on the 20th year this year that we've done this. We hold it at the State House and get high-level state officials, and it's kind of a low-cost, simple way of really recognizing and highlighting folks that are doing good work. And it's amazing, like, how important some of these awards can be and some of this recognition can be to folks who are kind of toiling in the trenches day to day and don't really get recognition. So we do this, and those awards also, we collaborate with our Green Communities division and hand out awards to municipalities as well as state entities.
Awesome. Thank you. That was some great conversation and questions, guys. We are getting close to the end of our presentation time, though, so I'm going to kick it back over to Jasmine to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie and Eric and Amanda, for fielding those questions and those fabulous presentations. For any questions I see another one from Rich in the chat here. I think we have a few minutes just to get to that one, and I think it's for Amanda. So Rich writes, what are the mechanics of the revolving loan fund? And if the end user keeps the savings, how is it reimbursed or revolving? So maybe we can close out with that question, Amanda.
Yeah, sure. So if you have a project, right now, let's say a chiller project, and you save $50,000 a year on your utility bill, it goes from $100,000 a year, which would be a fantastic annual electricity bill, goes down to 50. You have that increment that's now different. And so we capture that 50,000 savings, and that goes into the revolving fund to then be used for that agency thereafter for energy efficiency projects. I don't know if that directly answers the question you're asking, but maybe a little bit.
Rich, feel free to come off mute and confirm.
Yeah, that answers the question. Pretty
Sweet.
much. I might follow up with you because I'm curious as to.
Hey, feel free to.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jasmine. Great presentations, by the way, since I'm off mute.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, echoing that. Thank you, Amanda and Eric. I think we all learned a lot here about the ways in which your state policies have shaped your existing programs, as well as what some states could do if they don't have all this enabling legislation and policy activity to at least set up a framework to kind of leverage the existing state building stock as a place for demonstrations. So with that, I'll close out and remind folks that the slides and recording will be made available if anybody missed anything, would like to follow up. But thank everybody for your attention as well, and we'll catch you next time. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.